Good evening, everyone. My name is Mimi Plochet, and I'm Artistic Director of the Chicago International Film Festival. Thank you for joining us for the screening of MLK FBI tonight, or perhaps you saw it earlier, but we are delighted you are here with us now for this discussion with director Sam Pollard. A big thank you to IFC Films for sharing this film with us. If you watch the film with us at the festival or as a members screening, please spread the word that MLK FBI is now available still in select theaters and also on VOD on all platforms. I'd like to begin by welcoming our moderator for tonight, Lolly Bowean. Lolly is a writer, an award-winning journalist, and community storyteller. She currently manages the media and storytelling portfolio at the Field Foundation. Before joining the Field, she worked as a general assignment reporter at the Chicago Tribune for 15 years. She has been published in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the Boston Globe, and many more. She was also a 2017 Neiman Fellow at Harvard University and a Studs Terkel Award winner, among many other accolades. And she is also a Pulitzer Prize nominated writer who lives here on the south side of Chicago. Thank you for joining us tonight, Lolly. And now to Sam. Sam Pollard is an Emmy Award-winning and Oscar-nominated director. Here in Chicago, we've been honored to welcome him to the festival a number of times in the past several years, with Two Trains Running in 2016, Sammy Davis Jr., I've Got to Be Me in 2017, when Sam was also on the jury, and last year we presented MLK FBI in competition. Most recently, Sam was recognized with a Career Achievement Award by the International Documentary Association. It's always a pleasure to listen to him in conversation about his work and his career, so please welcome Sam Pollard. A reminder to our audience that you can put your questions in the chat box and we'll get them to Lolly. And Lolly, now I'll hand it over to you. Thank you both. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mimi, for that lovely introduction. And thank you to the Chicago International Film Festival for having us both. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight. Before I get started, I wanted to remind you, as Mimi has said, that as our virtual audience, we're very grateful for your attendance. And if you have any questions that you would like to pose to Sam tonight, please put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. Hi, Sam.
Hey, Lolly, how are you doing?
I'm okay. First, I just want to thank you for such a moving, such an important and riveting film, and tell you that, again, that it's an honor to be in conversation with you.
Thank you.
This is our first time meeting, but in many ways, I feel like your films and your stories have been present for a long time in my life. I can remember as a teenager watching Eyes on the Prize over and over in high school and later screenings for little girls. You have long documented the civil rights movement and told Black stories. But this film that we watched tonight, MLK FBI, it takes a unique approach and strikes a very different mood than your other work, than your other documentaries. Can you start off by telling us what brought you to this story and why did you want to put it on the screen?
Well, Lolly, in 2017, my producer of this film, Ben Hadeen, had read a book written by the historian David Garrow about Dr. King and how he was surveilled in the 60s by the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover. And he called me up after he read the book and said, Sam, I think we found our next film. We had just completed Two Trains Running. So I read the book and I said to him after I finished the book, I said, you're absolutely right. This is our next film. Great story, you know, to really look at King and the FBI and Hoover in some different perspectives. So we reached out to David Garrow, who I knew from Eyes on the Prize too. He's one of our consultants on Eyes on the Prize too. And then we took an option out on his book. We went to Pittsburgh where he lives and we took a camera crew over to his home and we spent 4 hours with him, videotaping him, talking about the genesis of the book, the information in the book, the stuff that he uncovered, the arc of the story. And after that 4 hours, we knew that we had a film. We knew that this, if his audio interview was as good as we both thought it would be the framework to tell this story. So then we put together a sizzle reel with some of his audio and images and archival footage that we found. And we started to go out and pitch it to try to raise the money. And it was a little difficult, you know, it wasn't like an easy thing to raise the money. And finally, around January, February of 2019, we had two organizations come on board with the majority of the funding. a group called Field of Vision, and another organization called Play Action. So they came on board, which enabled us to shoot the rest of our interviews, which was Clarence Jones and Andy Young, two of Dr. King's closest confidants, two historians, Beverly Gage, who knew about the background and the history of the FBI, Donna Murch, who knew about COINTELPRO and that organization that was started within the FBI to destroy and nullify, leftist and even right-wing organizations in the 60s and the 70s. But the leftist organizations that they infiltrated and wiretapped and bugged were the Nation of Islam, Malcolm X, the Black Panther Party, Huey P. Newton, Angela Davis, Bobby Seale, Eldridge Cleaver, lots of people, Stokely Carmichael. And then we wanted to get a couple of former FBI agents, to get their perspective on what was going on within the FBI in the 60s. So we found a former FBI agent named Chuck Knox, who's based in Texas. And then Ben suggested we reach out to James Comey, the former executive director of the FBI. I was initially reluctant because I didn't think he would say yes, but he said yes. And so we had him. And that was the group. We didn't have a lot of people. Usually when I'm interviewing people for a documentary, I usually interview 15 to 20 people, knowing full well that it'll probably end up being maybe 10 to 12 in the film. But this time I knew exactly how many, Ben and I both knew exactly how many people we wanted to interview, and that's what we did. And then we shot all those people in the fall of 2019. 2019. And we brought our archival producers in the fall. We brought our editor in, a woman named Laura Tomaselli, who did a great job. And we brought in a composer, Gerald Clayton, who did a fabulous job. He had done the music for our sizzle reel, and Laura had cut the sizzle reel for us also. So it was a really small collaborative team, and we had one shoot we had to do with recreations and ephemera from the period, which we shot, quite honestly, 2 days on a stage in Brooklyn before the city shut down. So it was pretty intense to get all that material that we got in the can. And we edited during the pandemic. Laura went upstate to her home and she edited from there. She sent us links. We would look at the cuts. We send her feedback. And we wrapped it up around June, July before we sent it to Toronto, hoping to get into Toronto and some other festivals. And we were very fortunate. We got into Toronto. We got into the New York Film Festival. We even got into Sundance for this year, but we decided not to go with Sundance. So it's been a pretty good run.
Yeah, and if you wrapped up in July, that was just as the current uprisings and the current protest movement for Black Lives was really starting to get a lot of attention.
That's right.
Gaining national momentum. So it was perfectly timed with this moment. And so you have this historical moment that's kind of speaking to the present moment.
Who knew, Lolly? I didn't know at the time it would be it would resonate so well.
Mm-hmm. So I want to talk about, I know usually with these talks that there's a lot of conversation about how you put the film together and the storytelling process, and especially how you dug through the archives. But I want to talk about some of the content of the film tonight. One of the things that struck me is earlier this year on King's birthday, his youngest daughter, Bernice King, tweeted, "Please don't act like everyone loved my father. He was assassinated. A 1967 poll reflected he was one of the most hated men in America."
That's right.
I think your film reveals just how disdained King was. With this moment where King is being held up as this sanitized, celebrated figure, why did you want to tell this story about him, and a story that's a lot about the white hostility toward him and toward Black Americans?
Well, April 4th, 1968, Lolly, I was 18 years old when Dr. King was assassinated. And at that time, my attitude about Dr. King was he was our great leader, and how horrible that he was assassinated. And I was telling somebody on the radio the other day that you might remember this. In many Black households back then, we had three images on the wall. We had Jesus Christ, we had John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and we had Dr. Martin Luther King. So he was.
And now we have Obama. right?
Yeah, that's right. So he was revered in our household. And, I didn't think much more than the fact that he was the man who had done the I Have a Dream speech. And he had led us, as Moses did, to the promised land. But as I've gotten older and as I see life in more complicated ways, I felt it was an opportunity to look at King, look at the FBI, look at them in a more complicated way. I still love Dr. King, but I didn't think he walked on water. He was a human being. He had his flaws, as we know, but he also had a mission that he was steadfast on completing, which he was. But people should not forget what his daughter just said. Not everybody loved Dr. King. I mean, in the film, as you might remember, when they took a poll around 64, J. Edgar Hoover was more popular than Dr. King in 1964. I mean, we like to think, we sort of reprogrammed ourselves to think that he was so popular in the 60s. He wasn't. And as you said, by 67, when he came out against Vietnam, his popularity was probably at an all-time low. I mean, he was going to have to deal with the backlash from the Johnson administration. He had to deal with backlash from within the civil rights movement, feeling that he had lost his way. How dare you, go off and deal with, challenge Vietnam. You should still be focusing on civil rights, which is really human rights. So, Dr. King as my mother would say, had a hard row to hoe. And I wanted to show that. I felt Ben and I both wanted to show that.
And kind of give this accurate picture that this person who is so beloved right now, that it was an uphill battle.
That's right.
It wasn't something that was very easy. I'm glad that you brought up J. Edgar Hoover and his role in the film. And, now I want to ask a question that's about storytelling and your storytelling device in this film. In your previous films, they center upon heroic characters. But in this one, you have King and you have J. Edgar Hoover, right? And in some ways, as a storyteller, it could be framed as a story with a hero and a villain. Is that how you approached telling this story? And how does time, the moment, define who's the hero and who's the villain?
Well, that's a good question. That's a really good question. You're absolutely right. I was creating these parallel stories of these parallel characters. Now, you could walk away saying that King was a hero and Hoover was a villain, or you could say that King was a complex sort of hero, and Hoover was basically a voice of what a white America was. I mean, he wasn't an anomaly. Hoover wasn't an anomaly. What he was speaking to in terms of wanting to discredit and destroy Dr. King was basically the attitude of many white Americans was this, this, Lolly. How dare this Black person get up, at the Lincoln Memorial and basically say we should have integration? White people didn't have a problem with us being segregated. It was fine. What's the problem? And when King did that, as you saw in some of those man on the street interviews, the white people were like, what? Hoover says he's terrible, but I think he's 10 times worse. And that white lady says, I don't like him because he's uppity. Uppity. Oh, because he's articulate. He speaks his mind. He's uppity. So basically, Hoover was standing in for many white Americans who basically, they were fine with the status quo. If we were second-class citizens, so what? What's the problem? Why should you people be unhappy? You may not have the same thing we have. It may not be equal, but what are you worried about? You may have to drink at separate water fountains. You can't go in stores and try on the clothes. What are you worried about? Hoover was speaking for America. So, he's a villain, but he's a stand-in for America, white America, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and depending on the storyteller, white America and Hoover can be the villain, right? In our narrative,
absolutely,
white America is that villain.
Absolutely.
But then, what you reveal about King, and I'm going to get, deeper into it in terms of his infidelities, some of his personal challenges that we have not been exposed to before. Does that make him an anti-hero who's become a hero?
Well, I don't know. I mean, you're a writer. I mean, I don't know if he's an anti-hero. My take is this, is that Every one of us, none of us are walk on water. All of us have our flaws. Now, the question about the flaws, though, are those are flaws that really, really hurt people in general? Obviously, it probably hurt his wife and his kids. There's no question about that. But did it really stop what he was doing in terms of his bigger mission, in terms of civil and human rights? No, I don't think it did. You know, it was obviously a flaw. We all have our flaws. I mean, I'm not sure I can say he was an anti-hero. I mean, I don't know. I'm not. I got to think about that one. I don't think I want to say that. I say this, Lolly. He was a flawed human being, like me, like you, like every one of us.
Yeah. And so you revealed some of those flaws in this film. And we know that this was based on the research and the information that the FBI had unearthed that revealed King's sexual infidelities. And, you know, the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover was trying to use this information as a weapon against King.
Yeah.
But in order to reveal that, you had to explore in this film the fact that he was unfaithful. Did you struggle with revealing this and kind of wrestling with this information?
Sure. I mean, I'm not like a guy who says, I'm going to put it in no matter what. I mean, Ben and I had long conversations. Were we doing what the FBI had been trying to do for so many years by revealing this? Were we doing their job? We talked about that. We had discussions. How are we going to deal with the supposed rape in the room by the other minister and Dr. King looked on? How are we going to deal with that? I mean, we had to think about these things. It wasn't like we just said, oh, we got to put it in, that's it. We said we have to put it in, but how do we do it in a way that it shows that we are trying to be, sensitive and what's the word I'm looking for? Sensitive and respectful journalist.
Mm-hmm.
I use that phrase. And so, yeah, we talked about it. I mean, it wasn't like we said, oh, we're going to put it in no matter what. We didn't want to create a gotcha moment. So when Laura edited the scene and we looked at it, we made some adjustments and changes. We were just trying to make sure it didn't come off as like, a gotcha moment. I think we did.
You didn't sensationalize it.
No, we weren't sensationalized. That was not the objective.
And is that why it's placed? Because it's kind of placed closer toward the halfway mark of the film. It's not illuminated early on. Do you think that's the reason why you kind of placed it later in the film?
No, I think the reason we placed it because structurally that's where it made sense.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the timeline, that's where it made sense.
You talked about just a moment ago, you said that you didn't want to do what J. Edgar Hoover was trying to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is ruin King's reputation by putting out this material. When at the time, why do you think journalists and the clergymen and the community decided not to absorb this information that Hoover was trying to publicize? This is a question from Ken. Thank you, Ken, for watching and submitting that question.
The reason was because back then the press didn't report stuff like they do today. Everything that you do is open game now. Back then, the press didn't do all that stuff. I mean, if they had we would have known about JFK and his covert relationships. I mean, we would have known about Lyndon Johnson. They didn't do it. They didn't go that far. It was like that was a line they didn't cross, which is has been moved.
Yeah.
So that's why it never took hold.
Do you have an opinion about that, though, Sam? I mean, is the media complicit in building up this image of JFK, of King, of these great men?
Oh, sure they are. But Lonnie, those were the times we lived in. I mean, is the media complicit now in showing everybody's warts and all? Sure they are. I mean, what's fascinating to me about the media today, to kind of push forward on your question, was that with all the scandalous stuff that Donald Trump did, and the media reported it all and televised it all, none of it stuck. None of it stuck. I mean, it's just amazing. None of it stuck.
Yeah.
So, sure. Listen, I was watching MSNBC today and yesterday, and as much as the media, particularly the media outlets that are on the left, not Fox or the other two, as much as the media is based basically poo-poos Trump and glad that he's gone. There's a part of them that wish that he was still around because why? Because it's news, it's ratings, you know, it's ratings. Joe Biden is never going to be a big rating getter like Donald Trump because he's you know, as Trump says about him, he's Sleepy Joe. But I'm happy we got Sleepy Joe in office now.
I would push back a little bit on that, Sam, but I'm a,
You can push back.
I'm a card-carrying member of the media. So I think you're right, though, that Trump always helped to produce content that was being publicly absorbed, and you know, without a character who was creating that type of content.
Think of it this way, Lolly. Look at the media dealing this week, dealing with what's her name, Green, the congressperson from Georgia, and watch the media next week when the trial starts. They're going to be on that. I mean, COVID will be like a back seat. You know, the Trump trial in the Senate will be front and center. Trust me. Yeah, you know that.
And but some of that is driven by public appetite too, right?
Yeah, but you don't always have to feed the lions. you don't have to feed them the raw meat all the time.
No, well, we have to. I mean, you know, I'm not here to defend the media. So you know what, Sam?
You can defend it. You can defend it.
I'm gonna let you have that one, and I'm gonna move on.
Okay.
Because I have some more questions for you, and you know, some things that I'm really interested in about your film. So we could do media critiques all night.
We could do it. We should get on the phone and talk about it later. All right, cool, man.
Yeah, I'm gonna put my phone number in the chat.
Sure.
So one of the questions that I wanted to ask you has to do with Bobby Kennedy and his approval of the wiretap. And this is, you know, I want your opinion of whether you picked up on this sentiment and what you thought about it, if this is the reason why you put it in the film. But one of the things that struck me is that Bobby Kennedy approved the wiretap because of King's relationship that kind of indicated that there was some relationship with communism. In the film, it said that that the FBI was concerned that the quote Negro situation would be exploited by communists. And it struck me as just being almost paternalistic that the FBI would think Black people would not stand up for equality without white provocation. So essentially, without the white communists telling Black leaders what to do, they wouldn't do it. Did that strike you at all?
Yeah, sure did. But remember now, we've just come out of World War II, where the French, the British, the Soviets the Russians were our allies. And all of a sudden, the Russians basically huff and puff and said, we're going to blow your house down, Poland, Czechoslovakia, you know, all these other countries. And they create what we know as the Soviet Union, you know. So, you know, we know about the Cold War, we know the Red Scare, and Americans were terrified of the Red Scare. Now, they felt, you know, people like Bobby Kennedy at that time, and J. Edgar Hoover in particular, felt that, you know, Black people would be coerced by the socialist agendas of the Communist Party, and they would lose them. Sure, it was paternalistic, you know. We can't let the Black people be coerced by these communists. We got to make sure we stop them, you know. So, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Sure, it was a sense of paternalism. But remember, Bobby Kennedy and John Kennedy, back in that period, they were both fervent anti-communists too. You know, it took Bobby Kennedy a few years to, as they say, change his stripes.
Yeah. Well, again, I just thought it was really interesting that they thought that the communist movement was really the threat before the civil rights movement, right?
Well, because the civil rights movement hadn't had, I mean, when King came around, I think a lot of people, like the Kennedys, were surprised at how impactful he was and how he really spoke to people. And then when they realized he was having this relationship with one of his closest confidants was Stanley Levinson, who had been a member of the Communist Party, that really raised the red flag. They said, uh-oh, here's a guy who's raising people's voices, basically saying stop segregation, and now he's flirting with this Stanley Levinson, who still might be a communist. We got to stop that. We got to stop it dead in its tracks.
Yeah. And they use that to justify tapping his phones and doing heavy surveillance. But then
Sure.
then we see in your film that surveillance becomes weaponized because all it is a information gathering tool to try to find things that they can use to exploit King.
That's exactly what that was the idea. I mean, but the FBI went too far, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, they went too far just to even wiretap. But then when they started to try to use his personal life to destroy him, they crossed the line.
So in this film, I mean, you are a watchdog, essentially interrogating the FBI and their techniques and their methods. And you just said that you think that they went too far. Do you think they went further than these documents even indicate?
Probably.
Mm-hmm.
There were informants in King's orbit. There were FBI people. I mean, let's look at the history of the FBI. Let's look at what happened with Fred Hampton in Chicago. Let's look at what they did to the Panthers. These guys were, as Malcolm would say on the other end, they were going to destroy these organizations by any means necessary. So no, they probably. I mean, James Comey says in the film, as far as he was concerned, this is one of the darkest chapters in the history of the FBI. Well, my take on it is there are probably even darker chapters.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Sam, as I watched it, I started to wonder, if some of the exploits that the FBI wanted to expose, if they had not set them up themselves,
Sure,
particularly
possibly.
because they had, people hidden within the organization.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's right. That's what their agenda was. That's what their agenda was, to set up to destroy these organizations within. That's what their agenda was.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes, to make it explode from the inside out, and then they don't have to have any sort of dirt on their hands related to how these organizations explode. One of the things that I was struck by, Sam, is some of the archival film footage that you show of Dr. King being interviewed. Sometimes he's being asked very demeaning or even antagonizing questions, and yet we would see him respond with such a calm and poetic eloquence. Did that stand out to you? Was it important to you to portray him that way? And in your research, did you find any footage where maybe he did lose his temper? Maybe he did.
Yeah, he never lost his temper, not in public. I mean, he was a guy who's had a really strong level of self-control. I mean, and that lady asked him that asinine question, don't you feel that your peaceful protesters are causing riots in the cities? He should have jumped up and smacked that lady. And what else did she ask him? She said peaceful protests, and she also
That
said,
it was leading to riots, and aren't you moving too fast?
aren't you moving too fast? But Lolly, that you still hear that stuff.
Yeah.
You still hear that stuff. I mean, listen.
Yeah, but you don't see that type of eloquent and just again poetic and poised response to it, right?
Yeah, because he was a minister. He knew how to deal with people. He was, and he was a person who believed in nonviolence. So he's not going to scream at people,
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you said was that he was very careful about his public persona. And so, no, he didn't lose his temper, that he explained things very carefully. And those were some of the clips that you showed. I'm wondering if you could talk about how this film to me reveals then just how strategic, just how, as you said, poised, how just deeply versed and steeped in his mission King was, because now we learn that in addition to leading the people, he was also extremely embattled in being challenged by his enemies in ways that we couldn't imagine. I mean, the FBI sent a note to his house saying, kill yourself, right? So this film kind of elevates just how deeply rooted he was in his philosophy and how strong he was as an orator and as a leader.
Yeah, but and I know that all that stuff weighed on him.
Hmm.
Weighed on him as a human being. I mean, you can see a certain weariness by 65, 66 in his demeanor. So it weighed on him. But he had he was always about a bigger mission. and the mission was to make us be first class citizens in America, and so no matter all the brickbats he had to deal with and all the, knowing that he was being surveilled 24/7, he was on a mission, and he was going to stay the course. I mean, before he passed away, besides talking about Vietnam, they were revving up to do the Poor People's Campaign.
Yeah.
So he was on a mission, and you could see, but he didn't want to really go to Memphis initially. I read that, but he felt he had to go. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he stayed true to the mission.
Stay true.
Even though there was this sort of lingering threat that somebody was going to try to take down, not somebody, the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover was going to try to take down his reputation.
But these leaders, Malcolm said it and King said it too, they all knew that they were going to be assassinated and killed. They were not sort of like walking around with blinders on. They knew, but they couldn't stop because the mission was more important than what might be the what's the word I'm looking for here? The mission was more important than his own sort of personal safety.
Yeah. Wow, what a sacrifice, right? Especially if you think of it in that sense.
Sure.
So knowing that, what lessons do you think this film offer to, for example, the leaders of Black Lives Matter, and the leaders of the current protest movement and the current movement for Black liberation?
Well, I think what it offers is that, listen, here was a man who believed in nonviolence, but he was seen as a radical back in his late 50s and early 60s. And that these organizations that are out there, activist organizations, can take a page from him and basically say, change, you can make change. You don't have to violently make change, but you can make change if you stay the course. And that's what King was about, staying the course. The other thing I think you could take away from this film is that history has a tendency to repeat itself. Some of the things you hear and see in this film from the 60s, are still being said today about Black people and people of color. Yeah. If you elect these socialist Democrats, they're going to destroy your suburbs. That's a watchword for communist. So you got to understand the way not to repeat history is to understand your past history.
Yeah, it has amazed me how many sort of trigger words and how much dog whistle language, especially in the past 4 years, had been tossed out. And it was like the same bag of tricks. But the reason why they keep referring to the same bag of tricks is because it continues to work, right?
Sure does.
Mm-hmm.
But you gotta fight the fight.
Yeah. If we want justice and liberation, and what other option is there?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. So, you talked about the lessons that could be offered from this film. I'm wondering about a question that you posed in the film to David Garrow, one of your inspirations that you talked about earlier. And I want to kind of pose that same question to you.
What's my responsibility as a filmmaker?
Yes. And when you're telling the story of a beloved icon, what is your responsibility to King and to your people?
Here's my responsibility. My responsibility is to tell the story and to show this beloved icon was a human being. If you go back and you watch my Sammy Davis film, I did the same thing. And I love Sammy Davis Jr., but I want to show him warts and all. If you watch my August Wilson doc, I did the same thing. Let me finish. To me, Lolly, nobody, not even Dr. King, walks on water. Nobody, And as much as he is a great man, he was a human man, a human being. And that to me is always going to be my litmus test, And I'm not fearful and I'm not frightened if someone says, well, why did you do that? Well, I did it because to me, that's my job.
Yeah, but Sammy Davis Jr. and August Wilson in many ways are...
Doesn't matter. You don't get confused. Don't get confused.
Okay.
Don't get confused. Listen, you're not going to tell me that I'm not going to let you tell me that Dr. King is such a greater man than those two men. Not really. He's just a human being. That's it. That's the bottom line.
And so do you think that empowers a new generation? Does it say to a generation that you can be flawed and still be great then?
Sure. Absolutely. What human being is not flawed?
No, no,
Who's not flawed?
no, we all are flawed, but we do like to hold our heroes and our icons up to a certain light, and we
Yeah,
like to think of them
but you
as
can't
being unscathed,
but
right?
you can't be confused. Listen, I just watched. I'll give you a good example. I just watched Regina King's film One Night in Miami
Yes.
a few weeks ago. Now there's a scene in that film when they're in that room. You saw it, right?
Hmm.
There's a scene in that film where Ali wants to attack Malcolm, and my brain was like, "Oh, why did she put that in the film?" Malcolm's iconic.
Oh,
How
okay.
could she do that? But then the other part of me says she should do that. If that's what she wants to demonstrate and present, that's fine. Malcolm was a human being. That's
Yeah.
all. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that was not the scene that I thought you were going to talk about, but we'll talk about that scene offline. You know what I'm curious about, Sam, is so if you feel like you have to humanize Dr. King and you want to show that he doesn't walk on water, who do you envision as your audience? Who do you want to watch this film, and who has watched it, and what type of reaction have you gotten?
I want everybody to watch it. I want people to do exactly what you're doing. I want you to challenge me and say, well, how could you do that? That's fine to me. I think that's fine. You
Mhm.
know, I don't make a film for people to say, "Oh, he's such a wonderful filmmaker. Oh, he did such a good job. Oh, that's so nice. Everything he did was cool." I got an email from a guy, a professor from City College, I think, a couple of weeks ago. Well, you should have really dealt with the fact that it wasn't just James L. Ray and it was a conspiracy to kill King, and you didn't open up on J. Edgar Hoover that he was homosexual. That's fine.
Mhm.
Everybody can have an opinion. That's part of the game. So I'm not frightened of it. you you're supposed to critique the stuff. You're supposed to question what I do. That's fine. That's what a good film should do, make you question things,
Mhm.
question the filmmaker like you're doing to me.
Yeah, I receive that. But I mean, even when you create artwork, it goes out into the world and you don't know how the world is going to receive it.
It's
I
not.
know,
Wait, Lolly. You're not there to worry about how the art world's going to receive it. You got to do what you think. So, for example, there's a wonderful artist, Carol Walker. You know Carol Walker's work?
yes.
Right. You know how she raises the heckles on black people's necks when she does her antebellum stuff and she
Hmm.
gets criticized. That's fine because as an artist, as a creative person, she's got to do what she needs to do. That's the same way I feel about what I do. I can't worry about how people are going to react to me and say, oh my God, I don't want people to be upset because I maybe, tarnished Dr. King's name. That's not my job.
Hmm.
That's not my job. My job is to present the work the way I see it.
Okay. I'll receive that. Although, I do think I know you present the work the way that you see it. But even so, like this film, it tilts a lot toward FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, and you really don't interrogate the sexual infidelities
But
um,
yeah, but here's my response to that. You talk about the sexual infidelities of King or Hoover.
of King.
Well, we just present the fact that he was involved with other relationships. I'm not going to go any further than that.
Mhm.
And again, what I'm saying, I'm not trying to do a gotcha moment.
Yeah, but again, it almost is that you are still filtering and you are thinking about the audience and what
No,
they
no,
want.
no. You listen. I'm filtering it because I have a certain kind of sort of demeanor about what I want to present, the way I want to present it.
Mhm.
That's all.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna receive that, Sam. I was so honored to have the opportunity to talk to you tonight. Who knew it would become this like push and pull
That's
conversation?
fine. That's good. That's all right.
I mean, the time went by so quickly. I do want to ask you because the film relies a lot on other films to tell the story. And so I kind of have two questions about that storytelling technique. One is that since you rely on footage from other films, if you had to give us a homework assignment tonight, where do we go from here? What films would you recommend that we watch for a better education?
Oh, I would say go back and watch every film that's been made about King watch From Montgomery to Memphis, watch King in the Wilderness. There must be like 10 of these films about Dr. King, and you'll see all different perspectives. And to me, that would be educational.
And why? Because you get those different perspectives?
Sure. Yeah, every filmmaker is going to bring a different point of view, going to tackle something different about Dr. King's life. I mean, that's what's fascinating about doing films about people like King. There's many ways to peel the onion. I mean, it's like Abraham Lincoln or Malcolm X. I mean, remember Alex Haley's book?
Yes.
Remember Manny Marable's book?
Yes.
Oh.
And I just read Les Payne's book. And you know what? I've decided, Sam, is that I side with people who get to tell their own story.
What does that mean?
Well, that means that I have more respect or more revelry for Alex Haley's book.
Well, wait a second. Now, don't you know that book it's a historic book, but it was shaded the way Malcolm wanted it shaded.
And shouldn't it be? Shouldn't we have the opportunity to tell our own stories and be the author of our own narratives?
Depending on how you, but you should be able to understand it, and someone else should be able to tell your narrative too.
No doubt. But I'm just saying that in the trifecta, when I look at Les Payne's book, Manning Marable's book, and then I look at the book that was signed off by Malcolm, I think that the one that was signed off by Malcolm, which is Alex Haley's book, is still the most powerful. And I mean, I feel similarly when I look at even Ida B. Wells, right? Because it was such not just an honor, but it was such an achievement for African Americans to be able to tell their own stories versus having other people author those stories for us. Dr. King didn't get that opportunity.
Okay.
You receive it? You don't agree, but you receive it?
Yeah, I'm going to receive it.
We're talking about all kinds of stuff, but at the heart of this conversation is about being able to receive wonderful stories. And the story that you gave us is just absolutely phenomenal. It forces us to reckon with Dr. King's legacy and his experience in a whole new way. So I thank you for it. And I thank you for this conversation tonight.
It was pretty dynamic. Good.
Thank you. And so with that, I thank the audience in the Chicago International Film Festival for joining us. We're sorry we didn't get to all of the audience questions, but we thank you for being with us. Good night.
Have a good night.